it was a series of lost opportunities, because Saved, Shot of Love and Infidels should all have been masterpieces. The material was there. Dylan was focused on the material and performance, but he just lost his way in terms of the abilities that he'd had in the past to sequence an album, to put it together so that it hung together, and picking the best performances and getting the take right quickly and efficiently seemed to temporarily desert him. And so we end up with albums that hint at greatness, those three albums, rather than portray greatness. But the evidence is there that as a songwriter and as a performer, he still had the greatness within him. And certainly if you look at the list of songs from that period, you've got an extraordinary body of songs, things like Caribbean Wind, Groom Still Waiting at the Altar, Every Grain of Sand, Blind Willie McTell, Joker Man. You know, these are songs of serious stature. They're certainly songs you could put alongside anything on Highway 61. The questions that he was asking of himself as he tried to find a centre ground for his newfound faith certainly drove him on artistically. When he found that centre ground, you've then got the situation where he's really not sure of where to go.
And this uncertainty began to filter into both the direction and sound of Dylan's mid-80s recording projects. After following the release of Infidels with a well-received tour, Dylan's work schedule took on a bewildering, haphazard character. Between summer '84 and spring '85, he laboured over material for a new album, recording in various studios with several sets of musicians. By the time Dylan arrived at New York's Power Station Studios for the final sessions of what would become Empire Burlesque, he brought with him a collection of tracks from both his recent recording output as well as unfinished work from the Infidels sessions. He had also decided to produce the new record himself.
Well, he started that album in L.A., and they did a bunch of tracks at different places in L.A. I knew nothing about it, and a guy named George Tutko recorded a bunch of tracks at Cherokee, who I wound up meeting years later. And then when they came to New York, they booked time at Power Station, where I was a staff engineer, and I took one look at that, and I said, all right, good. You know?
Some of the sessions for Empire Burlesque were started from Infidels, I think was before that. So they had some of the stuff, so he came in and I said, come on down to the studio. It was over at Power Station in New York. And I went in and he played some of the things, Tight Connection to My Heart. And it was, I said, oh, that's kind of cool, guitar sounds good. And he said, it's Mark Knopfler. And he said, we're going over that. So I said, going over that, you don't want to keep it? No, going over it. So it's okay, fine, put guitar stuff on it, it's great. So Tight Connection to My Heart, I played the solos and all the guitar solos and stuff on there. There's still a rhythm guitar left from Mick Taylor that's on there, but the rest of the stuff, he's like, wipe that, wipe that, wipe that. You know, back in those days, you know, you had tape, so there was no Pro Tools or anything. We could keep all 100 tracks.
We'd cut tracks with different artists, and we'd cut overdubs with different artists, and if Bob liked it, then, you know, we'd use it. If he didn't, no, but it was always like it was always like a collegial night, and there was never anything like that. But a lot of the guys who came around would ask me, now these are all faces I've seen before, either worked with on other sessions or guys I've seen around the studio and know for a few years. And every one of these New York guys is coming up to me at some point during the session and going, who's producing this? And it was like, you know, and if anybody asked Bob who's producing it, his habit on that album was saying, well, no one. But really, he was producing it, you know. I mean, it's his record, you know. You don't have to put on a whistle, you know, and a hat that says producer and blow it and say, okay, this is what we're doing. It was like there was blood in the water and there were sharks, because every guy who's been part of a band that he's been produced in decided that, oh, this is like a gig that's wide open to be grabbed, which cracked me up very often. And I would have to tell guys, some of them, well, will remain nameless, would be such pains in the ass about trying to take over a session. And a couple of these guys, I just had to pull aside and say, what are you doing? Just cool down, chill out, enjoy the night. Do your job, do what you came for. You know, yeah, okay. And you know, guys like coming up to me and saying, solo the bottom snare mic while I'm getting drum sounds. And you know, me just looking up and going, I'm looking at this guy, I know him for a while. Why? You know? And you know, I solo this, and he goes, I think you need a little 12K on there, you know, with Bob sitting next to me. And like, they think that, like, oh, Bob's going to go, oh, yeah, this guy, I'm going to hire him. I need him to produce, you know. And instead, he's just sitting there like this and looking up out of the corner of his eye, like, and looking back down. And I'm telling guys, it's like, you know, if you don't stop, like, I'm going to be here tomorrow night. Do you want to be here tomorrow night? If you really stop it.
Everything that Bob does, Bob's in charge. You know, I don't care who's listed as producer or not producer. I mean, I heard stories from musicians in New York on the early sessions. They said Bob would go hang out with somebody in the club one night and then come into the studio, and there'd be another drummer set up, and they would have all these session musicians, and they said, oh, who's that? Oh, I was hanging out with him. I want him to play on it, you know. The tracks that I was involved in had already been started, right? So it was just like, hey, man, you know, I came in the studio, and he was playing some synth part of one song, and then in the middle of it, I said, oh, try this, and that halfway through it, that's what I started playing, and that was some other, I don't even know what song that was. I played the synth on that, and then the guitar stuff was just, hey, man, you know, go ahead and play. You work with Bob, and it's like working with Michael Jackson, you know, this is a certain thing that he's going to do, no matter who's the producer. It's going to be a collaboration. And on Empire Burlesque, I'm not sure how the earliest sessions went, but this was definitely Bob producing. I mean, Bob didn't like something, and everything, you know, was like, oh, that sounds good, move on.
While Dylan was comfortable navigating his way through the chaotic landscape of the Empire sessions, he was less confident about the business of sequencing and mixing a final album. With work at Power Station nearing a conclusion, Arthur Baker, a hip-hop DJ with a nifty line in commercial dance remixes of rock songs, was invited to complete the final mix for Empire Burlesque. Chart hits with remixes of Bruce Springsteen and Cyndi Lauper had cast Baker as an in-vogue industry producer, and his recruitment seemed like a further attempt to rehabilitate Dylan as a modern artist.